It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy. Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, a.k.a. Caliban, and to paraphrase Shakespeare, some are born great, some achieve greatness, and some have pieces of a bat'leth thrust into them. I'm joined on this episode by Keith DeCandido. Keith is an author, editor, podcaster, musician, and writer of over 50 tie-in novels and numerous short fictions and novellas for properties like Star Trek, Stargate, Doctor Who, Farscape, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Marvel Comics, Dungeons & Dragons, and World of Warcraft. Keith is also the creator of his own original worlds, like his Precinct series, SCPD, his Cassie Zukov short stories, and he has a new book, the first of the Bram Gold Chronicles, A Furnace Sealed, which is coming out this year. He's also a regular contributor to Tor.com, where he's been rewatching and reviewing Star Trek series since 2011. Keith, welcome to the show.
Well, good to be here. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks for coming on. Your permission to come aboard is granted. Today we'll be talking about Tacking Into the Wind, the 22nd episode of the 7th season of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, an hour of television that is itself mere hours away from the end of the series and the conclusion of the Dominion War, a story arc that developed over several years and became the main focus of the show by the series' end. Critics and fans alike have praised the series for its long-form storytelling and the maturation it brought to the universe of Star Trek and sci-fi TV, but also worthy of admiration is the writer's ability to plan, plot, and bring to fruition a sweeping multi-season plotline without losing track of the story and character-based touches of Trek's procedural roots. And we'll definitely talk about that a little later in the show. But first, Keith, I want to know about your backstory. How did you become a Star Trek fan?
It's pretty much my parents' fault. I was my parents watched Star Trek when it first aired on NBC in the late 60s, and I grew up watching it in reruns. I was born in April of 1969, so the show was basically done by the time I was born.
Yeah.
But I grew up in New York City, still live here, and one of the local stations, Channel 11, which is now the CW affiliate, but at the time it was an independent station, and they were the ones who ran the reruns of Star Trek in the early 70s, every weeknight at 6 o'clock, and that was how we spent our weeknights. It's like my parents would come home from work, I'd come home from school, we'd watch Star Trek, and then we'd eat dinner. That was sort of that was the routine. So I grew up with Star Trek. And it wasn't just watching the reruns. I read the James Blish adaptations. I started reading the comic books in high school when DC picked up the license. I believe I saw all the movies in first run in the theater. I was was an eager devourer of Next Generation when it debuted in '87, and then in the late '90s. My affiliation became a bit more professional. That was when I sold both a novel to Simon & Schuster and a comic book to Wildstorm. Mine was one of the first comic books that Wildstorm did when they picked up the license.
Sure.
99, a Next Generation miniseries called Perchance to Dream. And I also helped develop the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series for Simon & Schuster in 2000. And then wound up editing as well as editing that series once it launched into a full-on monthly series in 2001. Sure. And then and I also contributed to it as a writer as well. And I've written more than a dozen novels, tons of novellas, and a bunch of short stories and other comic books and such. My most recent Trek fiction work was The Klingon Art of War in 2014, which is a coffee table book. And more recently, I've been doing more on the nonfiction side. I rewatched first Next Generation, and then Deep Space Nine, and then the original series for Tor.com, as you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
And currently, I'm reviewing each episode of Star Trek Discovery as it comes out for Tor as well.
Oh, nice. You've been involved rewatching these shows for Tor, and like, are there any specific insights you've uncovered by going back through and watching these shows episode after episode?
Yes, actually, there's been a number of interesting things that I've realized and that I've tried to discuss. One, in particular, with the original series, there's a lot of myths and preconceptions about the original series that are basically wrong. And in particular, there's a lot of assumptions about the characters and about what Star Trek is about that really come more from the movies than the TV show.
Yeah.
In particular, I joked that it was my hope that anybody reading the rewatch, if they came out of it with nothing else, they came out of it with the fact that Jim Kirk is in fact not a maverick who disobeys orders.
Right.
That was something that was completely an artifact of the movies and mostly an artifact of Star Trek 3, where it was a unique circumstance.
Yeah.
And just in general, there were certain things I noticed upon rewatching all of them that I didn't, binge watching it like that I didn't really notice while watching it on a weekly basis when it first aired. In particular, like with Next Generation, for example, I came out of it with a much greater appreciation of Jonathan Frakes as an actor.
Yeah, me as well.
He did some remarkable stuff on the show that I don't think he got nearly enough credit for. And I also came out of it really disliking the character of Geordi LaForge a lot.
I got that one too.
And also that there were a lot of things with Deep Space Nine to get to what we're actually talking about. There were a lot of things they tried on the show that didn't actually work. The thing is, they were trying so many different things.
Yeah.
And a lot of it did. The vast majority of it did work, but there were a lot that. It's one of the things that I think is admirable about the show generally, is that it was very ambitious, and there were a lot of things they tried to do, and not all of it entirely worked.
Right.
Although I think they do deserve credit for trying, and also for the number of times things they tried that did succeed. So yeah.
In a lot of ways, as we're talking about today, the idea of the Dominion War story arc and just sort of that overarching plot line helped to, I think, focus the show a lot from its early roots, where they're just trying whatever, like move along home, or they're just kind of throwing things at the wall in this new environment that's not a ship that's heading places every week.
One of the things that I particularly like about Tacking Into the Wind is that not only is it part of that specific Dominion War storyline that DS9 was doing, but it was also the culmination of plotline of just a general backstory plotline that had gone back all the way back to Next Generation.
Oh, certainly.
Back to the third season of Next Generation in the case of the Klingon story, and the fifth season of Next Generation in terms of the Bajoran Cardassian storyline.
Sure.
This was stuff. It was the culmination of a whole bunch of stories over about a 10-year period.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that I love about the episode in particular.
In addition to your many contributions to Trek literature, you've also edited Trek anthology fiction. How did you get started with that, and what's the reward in editing as compared to writing?
I had a background as an editor. I started out as an editor in the field before I started writing. Sure. And I was actually hired to, as I mentioned, when we developed the Starfleet Corps of Engineers series, I developed it with John Ordover, who was one of the editors at Simon & Schuster at the time. And he didn't have time to actually supervise a monthly series, so he hired me to do it freelance, and that sort of gave me the end to also pitch anthology ideas as well, since they were doing them. Some of them, they'd already done things like the Enterprise Logs anthology and the Lives of Dax anthology.
Right.
And some others as well. And I did 3 Star Trek anthologies specifically. 2 I pitched, 1 I was asked to do. The one I was asked to do was the New Frontier anthology, which was the same situation as with the Corps of Engineers. They wanted to do a short story anthology where people other than Peter David wrote New Frontier stories.
Right.
Peter was the one who was going to be supervising it all and approving it all, but Peter didn't have. They needed somebody who could actually do the nuts and bolts editing of the book, the putting together of the book, as opposed to the more supervisory thing Peter did. So the two of us basically worked on that together, with me doing the grunt work on it, and assembling all the authors and such. That was on a very tight schedule, which is another reason why they brought me in freelance to do it. The other 2 were ones that I just thought would be cool to do, and so I pitched them and they went for it. The Tales of the Dominion War and Tales from the Captain's Table. The former, which was a huge success, by the way, and I still get a royalty check for that every 6 months. Not a big one, but but it's well, we got to divide it among all the contributors, but it's one that still people are interested in. And the idea of that anthology was, what was the rest of the Star Trek universe doing during the Dominion War?
Right.
We saw the Dominion War the same way MASH showed us the Korean War. It was through the lens of a particular group of individuals in a particular place. And what I wanted to do was show the greater tapestry of the Star Trek universe and what was happening, right. Including dramatizing things like the Breen attack on Earth and the fall of Beta Z, stuff like that.
Right.
So, and like other stuff that was mentioned, like it was mentioned in Star Trek Nemesis that Shinzon led Romulan troops during the Dominion War. So, David Mack did that. I did the fall of Beta Z. Both Dave Gallanter and Howard Weinstein tackled the Breen attack on Earth, and so we got to expand it out a little bit. Tales from the Captain's Table was a case where I wanted to do a sequel to a miniseries that Simon & Schuster had done back in '98, which was called The Captain's Table, where it's this bar that sort of exists out of time and space, and that only ship captains can enter it, and they can drink free as long as they tell at least one story.
Sure.
And since '98, there were a whole bunch of new captains that had been added to the pantheon, whether it was on screen in the case of like Riker being promoted to Captain of the Titan, or the addition of Jonathan Archer with the debut of Enterprise. Plus, in the novels, we added a bunch of characters as well. Captain Gold from the SCE, Captain Clegg from the Klingon books I was doing. We'd also started up a Stargazer series, so we had an excuse to drag Picard in there and have him tell a Stargazer story. Right. Kira Nerys had been made into a captain, as well as Shelby from New Frontier. So we basically took the opportunity to add more captains to the list, as it were. So, yeah. I know it's fun. It's fun, gathering the stories and taking pitches from people and figuring out, trying to fit the needs of your theme, and see what different people's approaches are to what the theme of the anthology is. Yeah.
You did the unthinkable in Tales of the Dominion War. You killed Mr. Homn.
Yes, I did.
He just wanted to drink all the drinks. He wasn't hurting anybody.
But, well, I wanted there to be a death. I wanted there to be something, a meaningful death there.
Sure.
And, somebody we'd seen on screen. And, of course, he died protecting the family, which is what he did.
Right.
And I actually got to meet Carol Struycken. We were both guests at a convention a couple of years ago.
Neat.
And he had heard about it from someone else. And I told him, yeah, that was me.
Before we go...
It was cool. He liked the fact that he died saving the life of Loxana's kid.
Sure.
And like I said, I wanted... The story is more meaningful if there are consequences to a character that we know. When I obviously couldn't kill Loxana, and especially since
right,
already seen her in the there was a. I sort of wrote it as a prequel to a novel that had been published called The Battle of Beta Z, in which Loxana led the resistance on Beta Z after the fall. But it was also I wrote that story in late 2003. And that was kind of the 9/11 catharsis story I've been wanting to write since 2001, because I live in New York, as I said, and I lived through September 11th living here, and that was kind of it was a story I needed to write,
Yeah, and it's a testament to Carol Struycken's performance as Mr. Homn that a guy that barely says anything can provide that emotional depth. When we lose that character,
as LaForge said in one of the Loxana Troy episodes, he can't get a word in anyway. But,
before we go on, I have to know the history of the Chronic Rift.
It's the Chronic Rift that started out as something me and some of my best friends from high school and college all did in the early 90s. We debuted it actually in August of 1990. Right. It was we only really intended to do it for a few episodes. It was something John Drew, who was the creator and executive producer and director of the TV show, and who later revived it as a podcast in 2008. John wanted to, for a long time, wanted to get into TV production, and he thought this would be a good way to sort of back end resume stuffer, and give him a chance to have experience working, directing cameras and stuff like that. And it just kind of grew. We only intended to do a few episodes. There's us and some friends talking about some of our favorite nerdy things, and we started, we leveraged some contacts we had with a few people in the field, And that sort of snowballed from there, and we started getting, real, actual professional authors and editors and agents and stuff on the show.
Sure.
And we did about 100 episodes over 4 years, talking about all sorts of things. We did cool interviews, we did reviews, and it was great. We had a wonderful time doing it. It proved actually more useful for my career than it did for John in the end. Because it was doing the Chronic Rift that I met John Betancourt. John Betancourt was the one who wound up hiring me to be his assistant at Byron Preiss, which was my first real job in the science fiction field.
Right.
But it was great for all of us. We all had a wonderful time doing it. And John actually now is a high school teacher, and he loves it. So
great.
It's not like his life suffered.
Sure. Yeah.
But quite the opposite, actually. He's a phenomenal teacher. But and then we brought it back as a podcast in 2008. We haven't really been doing it much the last couple of years, just because life. Although the Chronic Rift Network still does a whole bunch of different pop culture podcasts in various stripes.
Sure, absolutely.
But yeah, that was just something we did for fun out of college, and it sort of grew. There was a period there in the early 90s where I would actually be recognized on the streets of Manhattan by people who watched the show.
That's crazy.
They got me a free ride on the Central Park Carousel once.
Ooh. Well, it was all worth it then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we're talking about the DS9 episode, Tacking Into the Wind. As I said, it's the 22nd episode of the 7th season of DS9. It first aired on May 12th of 1999. It was written by Ronald D. Moore, who I won't waste time introducing. His reputation precedes him. It was directed by Mike Vehar, who has directed over 30 episodes for the modern Trek series, excepting Discovery. He directed 7 episodes of DS9 in total, with Tacking in the Wind being his last episode for the show. He's been singled out by Ron Moore as his favorite director on the series, and he directed 2 other of Moore's scripts, Darkness and the Light and Rocks and Shoals. No star date is given for this episode, but it's squarely in the year 2375, near the conclusion of the Dominion War. Keith, your assignment, if you can, and I know you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Tacking Into the Wind.
Well, there's two storylines going on.
That's right.
In Tacking Into the Wind. The first is involves the Klingons. They are the only ones who are able to resist the Dominion's, or specifically the Breen's, energy damping weapon. And Gowron has used this as an excuse to pretty much wage the war all by himself, including some really insane strategies that are getting a lot of people killed, which is partly done to boost to undermine Martok's political position, because he has become a very popular general. The problem is this is hurting the war effort, and Worf feels he should be challenged for rule, but Martok refuses to challenge a sitting chancellor in the middle of a war. The irony of this being that it was Worf who was taking that position several years earlier during the Klingon Civil War, right. Which saved Gowron's life at least once. The other plot also involves that same weapon, but in the Cardassian underground that is being led by Damar and is being coached, for lack of a better word, by Kira Nerys, with help from Odo and Garak, has an opportunity to get their hands on a Jem'Hadar ship that has the Breen energy dampening weapon. And so they engage in this rather audacious plan to steal it. And things go horribly wrong, because if things didn't go horribly wrong, you wouldn't want to watch a TV episode about it. Meanwhile, Worf finds himself in a position where he has to challenge a sitting chancellor, and challenges Gowron. And much wackiness ensues.
Yeah, there's a lot going on. As far as interesting facts go for this episode, there's quite a few, mostly related to the episode's place in this Dominion War storyline. And we'll dive into that in a bit, but here's some light, fun facts. Kitty Swink, actress and wife of Quark actor Armin Shimmerman, appears in this episode as the Vorta Luaran. Swink previously appeared in the series as Bajoran Minister Roseanne in the second season episode Sanctuary, and she never shares the screen with her husband on DS9. Quark isn't in this episode because Armin Shimmerman was filming the 3rd season finale of Buffy the Vampire Slayer at the time. Luaran doesn't make it out of this episode, but her character is involved in the invasion and occupation of Betazed, as depicted in your short story, Ceremony of Innocence is Drowned, and The Battle of Betazed by Susan Carney and Charlotte Douglas. 2 regulars make their last appearances on the show in this episode. Robert O'Reilly as Gowron and John Vickery as Reset both go to their rewards, be they what they may. And there's not a lot of light facts to be found in the later In the later episodes of Deep Space Nine, things get pretty grim. Ships, worlds, and friends are lost, and it's all a far cry from the original 5-year mission of the USS Enterprise under Captain Kirk. I think a lot of hay has been made over whether Roddenberry and the producers of the original show would want stories like this told in their universe. But as somebody who has told a lot of stories in this universe, what do you think about the role of war and conflict in Star Trek storytelling?
I don't see that there's anything actively wrong with it. As long as the stories are good, and one of the things I liked about the Dominion War arc is that it never soft pedaled that war was a bad thing.
Sure.
It didn't glorify war, and war was something to be avoided at all costs, which goes back to the original series. Particularly Balance of Terror and Errand of Mercy, the episodes that introduced the Romulans and the Klingons. Both of those are about preventing war.
Yeah.
Or being embroiled in a war and trying to find a way out of it. And I think that this particular storyline was still true to Roddenberry's vision in as much as they are still trying to keep the Federation's paradise afloat, even though they're in the middle of a war. The Federation's ideals is what they're fighting for. It's what they're struggling for.
Yeah.
And that's an important thing, and it's something I don't think they ever really lost sight of, and part of the reason why they were able to do this is because of the nature of television changing. One of the reasons why there was never a protracted war on the original series is that every episode had to be standalone. Everything had to be, it had to end in those 48 minutes they had to tell the story.
Yeah.
That is no longer the case. Even as it is, Star Trek was ahead of its time in a lot of ways in terms of certain elements that would recur. There were themes and character bits that were carried across more than one episode, from the obvious, like having Harry Mudd come back, to little things involving Kirk, Spock, and McCoy in particular. Different aspects of their personality that were brought up later. Star Trek actually made, there were, like in Turnabout Intruder, there were specific references to past episodes,
right.
Which was very rare in the late 60s,
Yeah.
So I think that the difference is really because of the way television storytelling has evolved, not really because of anything inherently wrong or bad about the way Star Trek is. So yeah, I don't see it as a violation of anything. I think it's just a natural progression of, and that's true in Discovery now. Discovery is a TV show that is being told in the way that TV shows are told now, just as Star Trek was a TV show told the way they were told in '66.
Yeah.
But the heart of it is still the same. In particular, both storylines in this episode are about trying to make a society better than it's been. We're talking about two societies that have been antagonistic in the past, in both the Klingons and the Cardassians, and we're talking about trying to find leaders who, in both cases, they're nations that have kind of lost their way and need leaders to inspire them to become better than what they were. Martok in the case of the Klingons, Damar in the case of the Cardassians. And in both cases, it's members of our main cast, Worf and Sisko for Martok, and Kira and Garak for Damar, who are trying to, push them in the right direction, and to get them to be the heroes that they don't even particularly want to be. What I particularly like about both Damar and Martok, neither of them particularly want to be leaders,
right?
As opposed to, say, Gowron, who literally fought for the right to become Klingon Chancellor. Martok doesn't want this.
Right.
And Damar didn't want it either. Damar started out as, second Cardassian on the left in a random episode with Dukat in it, and he grew into this. He was thrust into the role of Leggett after Dukat went binky bonkers.
Right.
And even as recently as the beginning of the 7th season, he was trying to convince Dukat to come back because he doesn't see himself as a leader. He sees himself. He was waiting for somebody to give him orders, and the only one giving him orders is Weyoun, and Weyoun keeps giving him orders that make him just want to go get drunk some more.
Right.
And finally, he takes matters into his own hands. He forms the resistance. He asks the Federation for help, and then here he has to kill one of his oldest friends because, as he himself puts it, his Cardassia is gone and it's not coming back. And in the case of the Klingon plotline, this in particular, Ezri gives Worf a speech. One of the things I love about that speech is that it's a speech that only Ezri Dax could have given.
Oh, sure.
In general, in pretty much all the other 24 episodes of season 7, I had very little use for the Ezri Dax character. She wasn't very well formed. Nicole DeBoer did the best she could, but she was, it felt like the producers were trying very hard to slam her into the ensemble. And the problem is there were so many other things going on that it didn't always work.
Yeah.
And I don't think the character is very well served by the Spotlight episode she had either. Having said that, this episode almost by itself justified the character's existence because Ezri, by her very nature, has the knowledge about the Klingon Empire that Jadzia had and that Curzon had, but doesn't have the emotional ties that they did.
Right.
She doesn't have Curzon's deep affection for Korkang and Koloth and his experiences, basically being an ambassador to them, or, Jadzia's similar friendships and her relationship with Worf and her continued interest in Klingon culture. She's got an outsider's perspective with an insider's knowledge.
Right. And
it's because of that she can say what she says to Worf. She can say that, the Klingon Empire is corrupt. And we've seen that. We have seen that since The Father back in 1990,
yeah.
Third season of Next Generation, when the High Council basically conspired to accuse Worf's and Kern's father of a crime simply for political expediency, because the person who really did it is the father of somebody on the High Council, and that would send the Empire into chaos.
Right.
Which is exactly the kind of thing a corrupt government does. It was necessary, but since then, everything we've seen since then has been compromises, the political expediency over honor, whether it's Duressa's sisters trying to take over in Redemption, whether it's Gowron rewriting Klingon history in Unification, and all the way up to Gowron basically engaging in multiple idiotic campaigns with the express purpose of making Martok look bad so he himself will look better.
Right.
And
don't say anything bad about Gowron now. I think that Gowron might be my favorite Klingon character outside of maybe Krug.
Well, he's a great character,
oh, yeah.
But that doesn't change the fact that he's still,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's absolutely not a good chancellor, and he's basically throwing away the war to humiliate somebody that he sees as his rival. But that's what a classic old school Klingon would do. I mean, he's the product of the society that made him. And he started out when Worf backed him for chancellor as an outsider, and he's been taking what he wants and shoring up his power since day one. And to me, in that, he's the quintessential Klingon. Not in the sense of honor, surely, in the way that Worf and Martok are, but as far as being a conqueror who lives by his will and has the strength and cunning to back it up. I mean, he's a Klingon's Klingon.
And for that matter, to look at the other plot line, Rusad is a Cardassian's Cardassian, but but in both cases, it's a type of, their culture that is no longer tenable. In the Klingons' case, if they're going to continue to be major players and allies of the Federation, and in the Cardassians' case, if they're actually just going to survive as a people.
Yeah.
These are both nations that need to look forward rather than backward. Yes, Gowron is an old school Klingon, but that's a Klingon of a type that, yes, we saw in the original series movies that we're seeing now in Discovery, but that's not a type of Klingon that's tenable anymore if they're going to continue in the 24th century in the political landscape in the way it is, if they have to stay united against the Dominion and so on.
Yeah.
So, and again, what I love is about this episode in particular is that it picks everything. I mean, I would list this as one of the absolute best episodes of any Star Trek series, but unlike most of the other ones that I would put on such a list, this is one I wouldn't just hand to somebody to watch without any context.
Well, sure.
Because so much of it, what makes it great is that it builds on, like I said, 10 years worth of storylines on 2 different TV shows.
Yeah.
What happens with Kira and Rusat and Damar and Garak builds on so much that we've gotten going all the way back to the introduction of the Bajorans and Ensign Ro on Next Gen, and seen constantly as part of the backstory on Deep Space Nine. and the Klingon political arc of Worf constantly having to make compromises in order to basically sacrifices to his own honor in order to expedite political expediency in the Klingon Empire.
Yeah.
And this is him finally saying the hell with that.
Oh, yeah, right.
That he's finally doing something that will actually restore honor to the Empire rather than simply keep it from looking bad.
Yeah, the good soldier thing doesn't work if the general's nuts.
Exactly. Yeah.
As somebody who's written extensively for the Klingon side of the universe, what do you think about the fact that Worf has been kind of around for all these major shifts in Klingon politics? Like, Worf's kind of the Lee Atwater of, like, the Klingon Empire.
I never thought of that specific analogy, but yeah, it's interesting that he's. Well, I mean, he's in a unique position because he has that, like what I said about Ezri, about having the knowledge without the direct emotional experience. Worf has never actually lived in the Klingon Empire except for maybe a few weeks between parts 1 and 2 of Redemption when he was serving in the Klingon Defense Force.
Right.
Aside from that, he's never really been part of the Empire, but he has always lived up. He's always tried desperately to be the ideal Klingon. And part of why he's been able to is because he is separated from the reality of it and the compromises that are necessary in the real world. He can be an ideal Klingon, and that puts him in a unique position to effect change. Excuse me. Yes, it's a little ridiculous that he was involved in the installation of each of the last 2 chancellors, not to mention the return of the Emperor.
Right.
But by the same token, he was specifically chosen as the person to see Kahless because he was a useful political tool for Koroth and the other clerics to use to bring Kahless back. So it's an interesting notion. I'm disappointed in a lot of ways that Nemesis just sort of brought him back into Starfleet, because I love the way DS9 left him as the Klingon ambassador to the Federation ambassador to the Klingon Empire, because that was such a perfect next step for him.
Yeah.
In fact, I wrote several novels that took place with him as the Federation ambassador, partly because it's an obvious next step for him with everything he's done and everything he's been involved with politically with the Klingon Empire.
Right.
So yeah.
If he had died on Khitomer, all of this would be totally different. Be a totally different empire. You're clearly on board with the Klingons' characters and their setting. Do you think a Klingon-focused TV show could work?
Maybe. One of the reasons why I think it would be a tough sell is, and it's less of an issue now, but it would be very expensive.
I'm sure.
And that's always been one of the digs against it for a long time. Having said that, given how much money they're obviously spending each week on Discovery, I don't think that's so much of a factor anymore as it used to be. And also, just the technology and the makeup has improved to the point where it's less expensive to do it. So, I think it's possible. I don't know. I think there's a lot of elements of the Star Trek universe that I think would be good fodder for, a 6-episode miniseries or a 12-episode miniseries. I don't know if it would necessarily be sustainable for an entire series. I think just for an ongoing developing series, I think the basic model of following a Starfleet crew around is still the best model for a long-term Star Trek storyline. Having said that, I'd love to see it.
Sure.
I think there are lots of possibilities. I mean, God knows I've written enough stories that have focused on the Klingons that I think there's meat there.
Yeah.
But
we're kind of getting half of a Klingon show with Discovery. There's a lot of Klingon-focused content there.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Have you been enjoying Discovery? You're watching it?
Yeah. It's got some flaws, but I'm in general very engaged by the storyline. I like the fact that the main character isn't the captain. Yeah, sure. That we're actually focusing on, a low level character. In fact, you can't get much lower than where Burnham is at this point. And I like that it's a different type of focus. I like the characters. I'm interested in in the storyline and what's gonna happen. It's not perfect. you can sort of, there's a lot of people involved in the making of this show. I mean, the number of people whose title is executive producer on this show is about 50 names long.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's too many people, too many cooks sometimes. But overall, I think it's a good show. It's a good, solid show. I'm on tenterhooks waiting to see what's going to happen next. I think in particular, the acting has been superb. Sonequa Martin Green and Doug Jones and Jason Isaacs, in particular, have all been brilliant. And the supporting cast is very strong. It's a good show. I don't think it's a great show yet, but then again, I didn't think DS9 was a great show in its first season either. Sure. And, that turned out okay.
Yeah.
It's funny. I when I reviewed the first two episodes, because they aired simultaneously, I reviewed the first two episodes of Discovery for Tor.com, and I opened it with a paragraph that basically saying so I'd like to talk about a Star Trek show that people had to pay for, where previously they saw it for free, in which the Klingon makeup has been redesigned and the Starfleet characters have different uniforms, all with absolutely no explanation, which has a much bigger budget than what we're used to from Star Trek, and which has lots of behind-the-scenes turmoil, and in which the character who was raised on Vulcan is going through some emotional turmoil. I am, of course, talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture in 1979.
Yeah, right.
Nothing changes. And for that matter, I remember 1987 when there were lots of Star Trek fans who were insistent that you can't do Star Trek without Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and what are they doing putting this bald British captain up and trying to pretend like he's a Star Trek captain?
Right.
And that turned out okay too. To get back to Deep Space Nine in particular, Deep Space Nine did something very important for the franchise, which is expand the universe. Up until 1993, Star Trek meant these are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise.
Yeah.
It was Kirk's Enterprise. It could be Picard's Enterprise. It could be, if you wanted to stretch it, it could be Pike's Enterprise or Garrett's Enterprise. But it was still the Enterprise. With Deep Space Nine, it's expanded to that entire universe, and I think that's a great boon for storytelling. It means you can do things like Discovery. It means you can do Voyager or Enterprise or Deep Space Nine or the Starfleet Corps of Engineers or the Titan or all the weird ass stuff we've done in the books and the comics over the last 20 years.
Sure.
One of the best things one of the best boons for Star Trek storytelling in 1997 was the debut of New Frontier. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Up until then, Star Trek fiction had to tie into an existing TV show. That was the rule.
Yeah.
John Ordover at Simon & Schuster wanted to do an adventure where the reset button was dismantled, where they could do something with new characters. And what's especially funny is the licensing person at it was Paramount at the time who did the approvals. Now it's CBS because they're all one big corporate whatever. But the licensing person there wrote a very lengthy memo explaining why she thought this wouldn't succeed, but she approved it anyway because she figured, you never know, I could be wrong. And turns out she was wrong. It was hugely successful. And that opened the door to do all sorts of other cool things. We had the Stargazer series, the Gorkon series that I did, I mentioned the Corps of Engineers, the Vanguard series that Dave Mack, Dayton Ward, and Kevin Dillmore did, and then the Seekers series that followed. We could do things like Articles of the Federation, like Section 31, all sorts of different stories we could tell.
Yeah.
And that just adds to the tapestry of the universe.
Sure. Talking about Discovery, it's a non-network show, so they've got a little more latitude in their content. The war storyline on DS9 is very intense. I'm not a person that thinks that you need overt adult elements to elevate something, but I do feel like an episode or a series of episodes like this is where you could put some colorful metaphors. For instance, like if it was a cable show, the scene where Kira makes a pretzel out of her set felt like some choice profanity would have fit right in there. What do you think about the elements or the more adult elements of Discovery so far?
I don't have a problem with it. I mean, the people I've heard people complain about it that they as if they want their Star Trek to be pure, who seem to forget that in the late 60s, William Ware Theiss was constantly pushing the envelope of how much skin could be shown on screen.
Right.
The use of hell at the end of The City on the Edge of Forever was even more controversial in 1967 than the use of the F word was on Discovery more recently.
Right.
And Star Trek has tackled adult themes its entire existence.
Oh, certainly.
I mean, some of the earliest episodes were about things like, aliens kidnapping humans so they could, be fruitful and multiply as they were in the menagerie. And,
right.
The introduction of Harry Mudd as a space pimp
yeah.
who was wiving settlers. I mean, come on. The adult and things like, their Vietnam War analogies and the nuclear war analogies and the addressing things like overpopulation and the evils of war and conflict and stuff.
Right.
These are all pretty adult themes. It's Star Trek has always pushed the envelope of how much they can do.
Yeah.
In particular, they did. In the original series, Deep Space Nine. I realized this when I did my rewatch of Far Beyond the Stars. Deep Space Nine had an African American lead. This is still vanishingly rare on genre television. Pretty much every lead in every genre television show you can think of, the lead is a white person.
Yeah.
The only other exception that I could really think of prior to Discovery is Battlestar Galactica in Admiral Adama, played by Edward James Olmos,
right.
and that's it.
Yeah.
Every Deep Space Nine not only was groundbreaking, 25 years ago, but here we are 25 years later, and it's still hard to find another, person of color in the lead of a science fiction or fantasy show.
Sure.
Pushing the envelope is what Star Trek does, at least when it's at its best. And I don't see any problem with Discovery doing it either. I'd have a bigger issue with it if it wasn't part of the story, but it has been,
Yeah.
People have also pointed out the brief flash of Klingon boobage in Tyler's PTSD flashback,
right.
but that's what he went through, or at least what he's remembering.
Yeah.
And the profanity, I think, was one of the funniest scenes in the whole episode.
Well, yeah. On the subject of profanity, what do you think of the news that Quentin Tarantino might be involved in developing a Trek project?
I don't know. I mean, I'd go see it.
Sure.
I mean, he's enough of a nerd that I think he would do right by it.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. He might get a little overindulgent just because he gets overindulgent about every genre he dabbles in. I'm not so much worried that he'll turn it into, a typical Quentin Tarantino movie. I'm more worried that his excesses in general, his filmmaking excesses, might not get reined in, because that's been my biggest issue with most of his more recent movies, is that his, Kill Bill, for example, would have made one really great movie instead of two overlong, overstuffed, endless movies.
Sure.
So that's what I'm more worried about. Having said that, CBS and Paramount are pretty protective of Star Trek at this point, so I think that it could work.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's a long way off from actually happening, if it's even going to happen. The more I learn about how movies are made, the more amazed I am that any movie ever gets made. There's a lot of hurdles they have to jump before this is going to happen.
Yeah, that's true. Getting back to the episode, I wanted to make sure that we didn't neglect talking about the other plot line, the non-Klingon one, the one with Kira and Damar. Kira is on fire in this episode, played amazingly as usual by Nana Visitor, and she's come a long way over the series, but she's basically back to where she started. She's blowing things up as part of her resistance. In fact, right at the start of the episode, she's yelling at Rasat because he's not blowing things up good enough. You're making things go wrong.
What I particularly like about Kira in this episode in particular is how effortlessly competent she is.
Yeah.
Not to a degree that it's like showing off or anything, but she's doing what needs to get done. And in particular, when everything goes to hell on the Jem'Hadar ship, she's not throwing up her hands and going, "Oh my God, we're doomed." She's immediately coming up with a plan to fix it and to make it better and to salvage it.
Yeah.
She's always thinking ahead to the next thing. And coming up with ways of doing things and yelling at people when they're not coming along with her fast enough.
Right.
And I love that. Because that's how she survived in the Resistance for so long, was the fact that she was able to do that.
Yeah.
If she hadn't, she wouldn't have survived.
Right.
And I love that. I mean, one of the reasons why this is one of my favorite episodes, in addition to me thinking it's one of their best, is that my two favorite characters in the Star Trek pantheon are Worf and Kira. And this is a great episode. This is obviously, one of the best episodes for both of them. I mean, one of the absolute best moments, even if I didn't like the rest of the episode, I would have loved this scene, when Damar finds out that his wife and kids have been killed.
Yeah.
And he says, what kind of state gives the order to, kill an entire family? And Kira just looks at him and says, yeah, Damar, what kind of people do that?
Oh, horrible, yeah.
And it's just such a great moment.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, as Garak says a few minutes later, that was the smack in the face Damar needed.
Right. And even
he needed to realize just what was going on there. And Kira's the one in the best position to make him aware of it, just as, and this is why, I love the parallel plot structure here. Kira basically serves the same role for Damar that Dax does for Worf.
Yeah.
Gooping him on to challenge Martok, just as Kira saying that is what brings Damar along to the point where he kills Rusat rather than jeopardize Cardassia's future.
Right. They're Lady Macbething, but Lady Macbething in a good way.
Yes.
And I also like how after Kira, drops off that truth bomb on Damar and he runs out, she is racked with conflicting emotions, about...
Well, it was a nasty thing.
It was a horrible thing to say. That's true.
It was absolutely the right thing to say.
Yeah.
It was still kind of mean.
But
that did just lose his wife and kids for crying out loud.
That's true. I love the fact that maybe I'm putting too much on this that doesn't need to be there, but I love the fact that she is, capable and she's emotionally complex, and there's no... It has nothing to do with her being a woman. Do you know what I mean? Like, I could see, a badass male character being like, yeah, well, screw you and your family, and just keeps moving. Or you could also write it as that character being like, wow, that was not a cool thing to say. And Kira is just written, and as she has been for most of the series, as just a competent character who has emotional depth, and it has nothing to do with her being a girl or anything like that.
Yeah. I think it's telling that of the Star Trek shows, the DS9 is the one that most often passes the Bechdel test of female characters talking to each other, not about a man, and it's usually Kira and Dax.
Yeah,
but it's Kira and Dax are such great characters, both of them.
Yeah,
and I mean, I'm less impressed with Ezri, although again, I don't really blame anybody for that. That was something that was influenced by external circumstances that no one could control, except maybe Terry Farrell when she decided not to re-up. But those two characters were both really beautifully done. And again, something that is still irritatingly rare. Although it's one of the things I like about Discovery as well, is that we're seeing. It's frustrating. It's funny. It's like I'm watching it and I'm thinking, yes, this is great, but I really wanted more Michelle Yeoh.
Yeah.
And not just because I am an unrepentant Michelle Yeoh fangoober, which I am, but also I like the character of Georgiou, and I really wish we get to see more of her. And I'm really glad actually that the approach that Simon and Schuster is taking is that the Discovery novels they're doing are prequels.
Sure.
In which, and both the novels that have been announced so far, Dave Mack's one that's out and Dayton Ward's that's coming, both are Georgiou heavy, which pleases me. I know James Swallow's doing one. I'm not sure what I don't know one way or the other what he's doing in terms of plot, but I think that's a great way to go, because she's such a wonderful character, and it's frustrating that we're not going to get to see more of her.
Yeah,
except in
never say never. You never know.
Well, except in flashback, yeah.
Yeah, right. Kira,
and that doesn't preclude the possibility of seeing more of her.
That's true. Kira and Odo have always had a complicated relationship, and I really love the scene in this episode between Kira and Garak, where he's telling her how sick Odo is, and she's like, I know, but he wants to go with dignity, and I'm going to give it to him. And I mean, these are some stoic folks here.
Yeah. It's funny. In the abstract, I do not like the Kira-Odo relationship. I thought it was a mistake from a writing perspective.
Yeah.
And I still think it was. I think they worked better as friends. But Nana Visitor and Rene Auberjonois sold me on that relationship every time they were on screen together.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That was definitely a triumph of acting chemistry over writing in this case.
Yeah.
And this was one of the episodes where the writing lived up to it. that was a perfect summary of their relationship. Is that Odo's like, I don't want her to see me like this, and Kira's like, I know he doesn't want me to see him like this, so I'll pretend I don't know.
Right. As far as great character moments, I also like how Sisko basically tells Worf in so many words, like, fix this Gowron problem, do whatever you have to do, and he stops.
Who will rid me of this troublesome priest?
Yeah, and he stops just short of making a throat slicing gesture or pretending that he's got a noose around his neck, like, this is post Pale Moonlight Sisko. He's like, get it done. We got a mad dog that needs to be put down.
Yeah, that was very much a post in the Pale Moonlight version of Sisko.
Yeah.
But he was, one of the reasons why he did what he did in the Pale Moonlight is he's tired of reading casualty figures.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So,
is there a moment or character that stood out for you that you haven't mentioned yet in this episode?
I think my two favorite moments in the episode are ones I've already mentioned. One was Kira's smacking Damar upside the head. About how what kind of state gives those orders. Well, gee, let me see if I can think of one. And Ezri's conversation with Worf.
Yeah.
Basically summing up the last 10 years worth of Klingon stories.
Right.
And I really like that. I like the way, just in general, that Worf in particular has evolved, because I mentioned when I was summing it up, he was confronted with the same thing in Redemption when somebody challenged Gowron, and he was the one saying what Martok said, was that we're in the middle of a war, you can't challenge a sitting chancellor during that.
Yeah.
But he's evolved to the point where he realizes that the spirit of tradition is more important than the letter of it.
Right.
Letter of it, yes, Martok's right, and Worf was right back then. You shouldn't, in the middle of a war, you can't go around removing the leader in the middle of that.
Right.
And yet, it really was necessary for, the good of everybody.
Yeah.
So.
I also like after he defeats Gowron, they come out and put the James Brown cloak on him.
Yeah.
It's just kind of stylish. As we wrap up here, did you have any sort of last thoughts about the episode?
I just that I think it was beautifully written. Two storylines. One other thing that I didn't mention is that one of the things I also liked about it is it took advantage of the fact that it was part of the big 9-episode story arc that ended the season, starting with Penumbra going all the way through to What You Leave Behind. Right. And what I liked was that they set up most of this in When It Rains, the previous episode. They set up Kira working with the Resistance. They set up Rusat as an antagonistic figure, and they set up the fact that Gowron had taken over running the day-to-day of the war from Martok. And by doing that, it gave this episode room to breathe. They didn't have to establish any of that. That was already there.
Sure.
So they could just jump right in to, Gowron being nuts and Rusat being an irritant without having to take the time to set it up and just jump right into the story, which I really appreciated. I thought that was very nicely done, and a good use of the fact that they're part of a bigger storyline to make this individual story much stronger.
Yeah. Let's talk My Space Dad can beat up your space dad. Who's your favorite captain and why?
I'm going to cheat and say Captain David Gold of the Starfleet Corps of Engineers ship USS Da Vinci, which I worked on in the Corps of Engineers series.
Sure.
Because he's basically Colonel Potter from MASH, only Jewish.
Okay.
That's how I told everybody to write him when I was editing the series. And he rapidly became my favorite captain, even though he wasn't actually the main character. The main character was Sonia Gomez from the Next Gen episode Q Who. She was the first officer and leader of the Corps of Engineers team, so she was kind of the star. But in terms of the on-screen captains, I would have a hell of a time choosing among Kirk, Picard, and Sisko, because I love all three of them for completely different reasons.
Yeah.
I actually rewatching 2 years ago I would have said either Picard or Sisko, but rewatching the original series has given me a better appreciation of the Kirk of the TV show in particular.
Yeah.
The Kirk of the movies was kind of an asshole, but but the Kirk of the TV show was a great captain and an admirable character. I think being promoted really just turned Kirk into a jerk in motion picture, and he never really recovered from it. But
now that we've reached the end of the show, you'll receive a commission and the rank of ensign. What department on the ship do you work in?
One of the science labs. They tend not to get blown up.
That's true. Yeah, right.
Or stellar cartography. They have cool graphics.
Ensign DeCandido, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTPod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
If they go to decandido.net, that's sort of a link dump for where you can find me online. That has links to my blog, my Facebook page, my Twitter feed, the podcast that I do when I remember to do it, which it's been a while. Also, I have a Patreon set up where where you can get nifty writings from me. I also still contribute regularly to Tor.com, and currently, besides reviewing Discovery, I'm also doing a rewatch of superhero movies that are based on comic books. And again, if you go to decandido.net, there's links to all that stuff, as well as an email link and links to Amazon where you can find my books and all sorts of other
Sure,
things.
and where can people find your new book when it comes out?
A Furnace Sealed will be available from all the usual online book dealers and possibly some brick and mortar stores, but definitely from like Amazon, BN.com, Kobo, all those guys. It'll be published by Wordfire Press, hopefully sometime by the summer, I'm hoping for. And also coming out sometime in the first half of this year will be the next Precinct novel, Mermaid Precinct.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Yeah. Going to be working on that and some other cool stuff in the pipeline as well. So.
Great. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Aaron. I had a good time.
Me too. We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.
It's on your